Okay, let's talk for a minute about the interactive process. When it comes to the ADA and this whole business of accommodation, the ADA has a small wrinkle in it that has a direct bearing on your potential costs and the risks of litigation. Let me tell you what I mean. The regulations strongly suggest when a person makes a request for an accommodation, you engage that person in an interactive process. Now, you can be sure that's a term created by attorneys and for attorneys that has a potential to be pretty confusing. But if you translate it into English, what it means is to have a chat. Remember, the person with a disability requests the accommodation, and then the interactive process begins. And here are the steps. First step is to be sure you analyze that job and understand its essential functions. Then sit down with that employee and have a chat about things like what are the essential functions, what are the barriers imposed by her impairment in terms of performing those functions, what are the possible solutions to those, and what are her personal preferences. Now remember, you're the person who decides the effectiveness of each accommodation. And you're the person who decides its reasonableness. And you're the person who decides which, if any of these, will ultimately be implemented. Sounds like a big hassle. Is it really necessary? Is it really worth it? Oh, I think so. Listen up now. Because let's suppose, hypothetically, that a charge is brought against you of failure to accommodate, and that charge is proven beyond a reasonable doubt to the courts or to the EEOC, and at the end of that whole process, you are found guilty of the failure to accommodate. What do you have to do? Well, that's a breach of the law, and there are remedies for a breach. Nobody goes to jail, no, but you will be asked to take corrective action. Provide that accommodation that you failed to provide. But there's also the matter of damages, compensatory and punitive damages. And here's where things get interesting. If you engaged in the interactive process, you're exempt from those compensatory and punitive damages. If you fail to engage in the interactive process, you may have to pay compensatory and punitive damages. And that, my friends, that's a big deal. But think about it. Why would these people with disabilities, these activists who are so eager to litigate, why would they agree to waive their right to compensatory and punitive damages in an instance of failure to accommodate? And the answer is they want to be meaningfully involved in decisions that pertain to their lives, particularly in something so important as employment. After all, they have this slogan, nothing about me without me. You know, I think that's pretty cool. I think it's pretty American. So it is your right to make a decision about accommodations unilaterally. But remember President Bush 41 in 1990 when he signed the ADA? If we asked him what he thought about that, he'd probably say, wouldn't be prudent.
I had a sister, younger sister, and she was severely disabled. She could not speak. She could not stand. She could not feed herself. She was totally dependent on our mother. And she passed away, I believe, when she was about 7 or 8 years old. But I still have very vivid memories of her. The most interesting thing about ergonomics is if you do something that makes a difference in people's life. Yes, I'm sensitive to people with disability and interested if I can do something to make their lives better, to make them more independent.
So what are the specific benefits of reasonable accommodation? They're both direct benefits and indirect benefits. Now, direct benefits have been priced out at about $1,500 per accommodation. They relate to changes or improvements in the functioning of the individual worker that we've been talking about. Things like his improved productivity and attendance, successful retention, maybe his hiring, savings in worker compensation, or savings in replacement hiring costs. And of course, the fact that by his being with us, he will improve our overall workplace diversity. Indirect benefits are a little bit different. They tend to apply more to the overall group or team where the person is working. They include things like overall productivity and attendance, morale, safety, a larger customer base, better customer relations, and improved coworker interactions. Of course, the opportunity to avoid conflict or resolve conflict is its own benefit. Most of us feel pretty good about that. But if you took all of these benefits in the aggregate and lumped them together, they don't begin to compare in a commercial sense to the value of the next benefit, innovation. Okay, Here's a short but true story. Some years back, I was advising a large phone company here in the Midwest. It was the middle of winter. I received a call, and a lot of attorneys and human resources executives were in a conference room wringing their hands with anxiety. Turns out there was a young man in the waiting room, awaiting his interview, to be a services technician and pole climber for the phone company. Well, that doesn't sound like much of a problem, except that this young man was spinal cord injured, and he used a wheelchair. The company felt they were being set up. So I drove down as quickly as I could get there, and I said, this is a great opportunity to practice our interactive process. We invited the young man in who had been waiting much too long for his interview. And when he came in, he made a very good accounting for himself. Very quickly, he was able to produce the proper educational credential that he just completed at the local vocational technical school. He surprised everybody when he produced not just his diploma, but a large amount of photographic evidence that showed that he, with proper rigging, was a professional mountain climber. There was no doubt he could shimmy up and down those poles with the best of them, and quite safely and quickly. However, the hiring supervisor was still skeptical. He asked if he could take the young man for a ride, and I asked if I could tag along. And we went through the streets and the back alleys of the large city that was involved, and we noticed something that was altogether too obvious. It was pretty clear the problem wouldn't be getting up and down the poles for this young man, but access to those poles was another matter. There was every manner of fence, barbed wire, garbage dumpsters, some really vicious dogs, not to mention the snow and ice. The young man looked a little discouraged. He withdrew his application, he thanked the supervisor, and he drove home in his van. Is that a good outcome or a bad outcome? I think it was a good outcome. A lot was learned that day. The company learned that it's very dangerous to make any presumptions of incapacity on the basis of what you see at a first impression. And the young man learned that when you're choosing a particular career path, make sure you know that you prepare yourself not just for the tasks to be performed, but that you become familiar with all the working conditions surrounding that task. So the law is pretty clear. You really don't have to accommodate anybody at all if you choose not to, but you do have to entertain and consider all accommodation requests and their reasonableness. And when you do, there's always a valuable lesson to be learned.